I'm kind of shocked sometimes in my math classes. I don't just teach this class, I teach the support classes as well. I'm shocked with how many people just don't take notes. The reason why math taking is, why note taking is important in math, it's an active process. So the act of writing is what's actually helping you in terms of retaining it, in terms of learning it. Passive is something that you do when you watch a TV show. You're just like sitting back for enjoyment, just sitting there, oh, yeah, it's great, entertainment. Active is when you're actually taking notes, you're writing. The more you write, the more you are apt to retain it. In terms of sort of like a file of information, so I will tell students all the time, they'll get ready to take their tier test, and they're like, what should I use to study? I'm like, where's your notes? I'm like, well, I don't have any. What have we been doing? If you think by just watching the videos in Ed Ready that you're going to be able to store 8 units of information in your head and just be ready to go for the tier test, it's just not going to happen. Also, too, taking notes while you're reading your textbook. So I know that seems weird, because you're like, why do I have a textbook? This goes for all your classes. While you're reading your textbook, if you are writing at the same time, you are so much more apt to retain that information. So there was a study done back in 1987. It says students who do not take notes in a lecture will lose information as follows. So just imagine that you were in your history class right now, and you didn't write anything down. You just sat there and you listened to Mr. Quinn lecture the whole time. Which, by the way, he's a beautiful lecturer. I'd like to listen to him. I just strongly suggest his class. Anyway, you didn't write anything down. What this study is showing is 20 minutes after you left, you lost 47% of the material. So they did this study where they like tested people on what they actually listened to during the class. After 1 day, 62%, 2 days, 69%. You can see after 15 weeks. Now, keep in mind this semester. You take your exams on the 16th week of the semester. So if you've sat in your history class, and you've sat back, you've not taken any notes, you've just sat there and listened to Mr. Quinn, you've lost 95% of what you were learning at the beginning of the semester. Like, it's gone. Ouch. So note-taking is vital for you to be able to retain information. Note-taking is vital in math, so when you get ready to take that tier test, and I go, hey, it's time for you to study, you have something to actually fall back on and study. Now, this is not something that I've copied and pasted from the internet. This is my opinion on what I've seen during my 11 years now teaching math. Step 1, first and foremost, label your paper. So when you go to take notes in this class, at the top, your paper should be labeled with your date and the topic. So come Wednesday, I'm going to lecture you on rounding and estimation for those of you in tier 1. So on Wednesday, when you come in to sit down in class, and I said, hey, we're going to talk about rounding and estimation today. It should be rounding and estimation. I don't even know what day it is on Wednesday. I don't even know what day it is. But you should put the date at the top. And the reason being is because, again, when a student takes a test or a quiz, and I'm like, hey, let's go back to your notes on rounding and estimation. It is not some like massive thing of paper for like 20 minutes trying to find it. If it's labeled, you automatically know where it is. Always record any vocabulary, key phrases, or steps to solving problems. I know my husband and I, when we teach math, we're both big step people. Case in point, steps for taking notes in math, no pun intended. But when I lecture to you, I'm like, okay, here's the steps for doing the Pythagorean theorem. Steps in vocabulary and diagrams are probably the most crucial thing for you to write down in math. Step 3, examples are a huge portion of your math notes as well. So you want to write down each step of an example, but here's the big thing. I want you to stop and think about what it's like. You've all taken notes in math class before. I did the same thing too. It took me a long time to learn this. I wrote down the example that the person was putting on the board, but I never wrote beside it the words that the instructor was speaking. Does that make sense? So it's like, okay, hypothetically. So like, don't write this down, buddy. What I would write down on my paper was something like this, and then I would get home. You ever get home and you look at your math notes and you're like looking at it and you're like, I did some good work in math today. Please tell me I'm not the only one who has this feeling. You're like, I did really well. Like, I really understood it when he was telling me what was going on. But then you get home and you're like, I have no idea how he got that answer. It looks really pretty. But I had no idea how he got there. It took me so long in college to grasp the concept that not only did I need to write down the example, but I needed to write down what the person was saying in order to get me the answer. So like in this case, I'd be like, okay, the first step you want to do is subtract anything outside of the variable. Okay, don't write this down, by the way. And I'm not going to do this whole thing. And then step two, the person or the instructor would say, you want to isolate the variable by dividing by the number that's beside the variable. Stuff like that would have been helpful to me when I got home to actually realize what in the world I was doing. I never wrote that stuff down. I only wrote what the instructor wrote on the board. So all the stuff that's coming out of their mouth to actually help you solve the problem needs to go recite. Otherwise, you're going to have that same thing and get home and be like, oh, it looked good in class. I don't know how about this. Step 4, my suggestion is anytime you've taken notes in class, the paper that comes directly behind those notes should be your homework. So like in this class, it would be your practice or your unit test and Ed Ready. When you go on to get in pre-calculus, you go on to get in Math 143, you're going to have homework in Pearson. If you take your notes and on the paper right behind it, you label it, hey, today we did function notation as my notes in class. Directly behind it is my function notation homework. When you go to study for that exam, there's everything you need right there. Your homework's not on some random sheet of paper 10 pages back from where you took your notes. Does that make sense to me? And then step 5, always number your paper and always show each step of your calculation on quizzes and tests. You probably had a teacher preaching to you since, I don't know, like third grade, second grade. Show your work. Isn't that like the key phrase in there? Show your work, show your work. There is a reason why we say as instructors, show your work. Too often than not, last semester in this same class, I would say, hey, you know, you have failed this tier test twice now. Let's go back and look at it to see what went wrong. So I would have a student, I'm not calling names, but I would have a student pull out this notebook, and it's like this random notebook full of, gosh knows what, like stuff from history, psychology, anatomy, like it's got all this stuff in there. And I'm like, okay, how did you get the answer to question number 3? And they like start flipping through the notebook, and they're like, well, I know it's in here somewhere. And then there's some problem that they found, like, oh, well, this is it. And I'm like, nope, that's not the problem. So we keep flipping, and then they're like, oh, I think this is it. And they're like, nope, that's not it. And I'm just sitting there, and I'm trying, like, I keep a smile on my face, like, we're going to find it, it'll be okay. Y'all, we can avoid this. We can. When you take a test in this class, label the test, number your paper as you go. I'm not saying you just show your work on everything. There's some of them that's just like simple multiple choice. That's fine. But if it's some problem like this and you get the wrong answer, and say you said the answer was 10, and I'm like, well, hey, how did you come up with 10? Let's fix the mistake somewhere. You're like, I don't know how I got 10. I just got it. We'll never know. Like, we'll never know how you got there. We'll never know what went wrong. So I think of anything that you take away, especially in this class, that's probably the most important thing. When you go to take tests, number your paper, show your work. So when I go to help you, it makes things go so much quicker. Don't get me wrong. If you don't know your paper, I'm still going to help you. We're still going to get there. Just like I did with the student flipping through 20 minutes trying to find the word. But it'll just make life easier. So general tips, and again, this is me personally speaking to you. When you're in this class, I would strongly suggest using pencil or erasable pen. Pen in math is never a good thing. It just makes for some messy note-taking. Dedicate a binder just for math. This is where I'm speaking to that. I actually have multiple students this last semester. when I say, hey, let's go over your test, and it's like trapped within some notebook that contains like everything they've ever done. Now, it's fine to have like one binder for all your classes as long as it's separated. Consider dividers for each unit or each tier. That's an option. So again, you have 8 units in tier 1, you may want to have a divider for each one of them. Or for some of you that are planning to do all 3 tiers, maybe you want to separate it into tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. I am one of those, I am the nerdiest student ever. I love school supplies, like it makes my life. Like with Staples with a like penny sale, I don't even need them, but I just go and get them just because I love them. I was that student, y'all would laugh because you know we all got them in class, that like breaks out all the highlighters and like puts them out on their desks. Yeah, at the beginning of class. I know I'm not the only one out there, but anyway, I would love to like color code and highlight. But seriously, sometimes I get so caught up in like what color I wanted to do that I totally miss what the instructor was saying because I'm just so into like little details. It's just how I am. Consider highlighting after you've taken notes. I'm going to show you the example of that in just a minute. Highlighting is a great thing to use for studying as long as you don't overdo it like I did. So after you take your notes, go back and highlight key vocabulary or key steps. 2, after you take notes, consider rewriting them. So a lot of students are like, oh, I didn't even like taking the notes in the first place. Now you're going to ask me to rewrite them. This doesn't just go for math. This goes for any of your subjects. Again, this is something like I learned later on in college. I did not get it at the very beginning. When you rewrite your notes, you are so much more apt to memorize them than when you did it in class. Because when you're in class, if you have an instructor like, I'm not trying to call anybody out, but we have some instructors here that talk really, really fast. And they're writing about 1 million miles a minute on the board, and you're just sitting there doing everything you can in that moment to get it on your paper. When you go home, that's kind of your time to slow down and say, okay, let me rewrite these and kind of put them in my own words so I actually understand what I did in class. This is a great form of studying as well. Rewriting your notes, again, your brain remembers what you do. It doesn't exactly always remember what you hear. So rewriting your notes is a great study tool. Does anybody have anything you want to throw in there? This is just my opinion. Anything else, Kevin? Yeah.
One question, like if we are in class, whatever, doing it real quick, can we go online and see it, like the online version of it?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Now, in this class in particular, I post every video that I do. So every time I do a math lecture in this class, I posted the one that I did from my online class as well, so you can go back and rewatch it. Now, not all instructors do that. Not all instructors create videos for their seated class. We do allow recording as long as you have permission from the entire class. So that's something that I would go up to the instructor and say you're interested, if you're interested, especially if it's something like a history class where they're giving so much information in a presentation. You can record it as long as the instructor passes out a consent form to every student and they sign off on it, then you can record the class. Also, too, something that I would suggest, if it's a seated class and the instructor posts the PowerPoints, I would really suggest printing those. It'll make it so much easier so you don't feel like you have to write down every single thing the instructor says. The Map Center has free printing, so I would always suggest whatever printing. Most instructors, I would say, especially like now with COVID and everything, are getting a lot better about posting their materials online. Yeah. Does anybody, that's a good point. Does anybody else have any thoughts?
Are you talking about recording with the computer or are you talking about recording with the little?
Either one. If you are recording, like I said, if you're recording the entire class, since students do speak in a class, you do have to have the consent of the class to record it. I didn't hear you. It's fine. It's fine. But it's just like a little form that everybody signs. It's like one of those photo consent forms. Like it's this little form that everybody signs, just saying, "Hey, we agree that we can be recorded." That's fine. But yeah, I didn't hear anything.